Hi, so for today's class, we're discussing immune obstacles and some of the obstacles that the immune system may have when being faced with certain pathogens. So in our discussions this week, we discussed a lot of things. We discussed innate immunity and the complement system, which which work together, and then we spoke about the humoral part, which is more of an adaptive response. So as far as the innate immune response, this is something that we're all born with. It's present at birth, and it's short-term immunity. The first line of response would be the physical barrier, like our skin. Then there's messengers, which is the second line of defense, and then we have our cellular response, and then we have our infection that would be controlled. So as far as innate immunity responses go, the first line of defense is the skin, of course. So like, let's say I'm cutting my roses that I put in my vase and I get a puncture in my finger. The area is going to become inflamed, it's going to be red, and it could be also very painful. So at this point, what happens is that our microbiota, like whatever it is that we possessed, is probably the best line of defense. But what happens is that there's chemical signals that are sent all over the place, and these histamines dilate in our system, and the blood vessels kind of recruit other cells as well to the site of the injury, to kind of like say, hey, listen, there's something going on here. We need to rally around this particular area. And macrophages and neutrophils create phagocytes, and these mast cells are the ones that produce the histamine. So then after the infection is gone, or after it's been controlled, that means that the invading pathogen has been destroyed and it's no longer a threat, and inflammation is reduced. As far as the innate immune response, you also have the complementary response, which could also include very, very severe cases like meningitis and fever, and it could cause deficiency in the complement system. So there's antibodies. These antibodies in our system are triggered by these bacterial cells that have like these little, I guess, things that are attached to the outside of the cell. And then it releases this inactive protein and becomes active, and it activates all C3, so it becomes like a cascade, and it also induces inflammation as well, and it makes a hole in the membrane and it destroys the bacterial membrane. So this is how something could be a little bit more intense, and have to create other ways of breaking down and tackling these pathogens that get into our body as well. So along with that, we have also the adaptive immunity, and that involves all the cells. And what it does is that it recognizes extracellular pathogens and produces antibodies. So what happens first is that the antigen is first, exposed to, there's exposure to the antigen. Then it binds to the B cells that recognize that particular antigen. They colonize and they expand. The B cells then start to make antibodies, which is the job of the plasma to do. And then memory cells are made by these B cells to protect the body. And why these memory cells are so important is because they really alert the body to fight certain certain pathogens. So, like for instance, chickenpox or some kind of virus like the flu virus. You get a vaccine and it helps to create these antibodies in your system so that later when you're faced with it or your child is faced with it, then you don't necessarily get the virus as badly as you think. So there's a tremendous amount of antibodies in our system. There's more than 20, I think, from our reading. And one of the things about adaptive immunity is that it's very specific defense to the body, where innate immunity response is not very specific. So the innate response could be a hit or miss type of thing, whereas the adaptive immunity is very targeted. So it's very targeted towards the virus or a particular pathogen that's in there that is trying to get. T cells have subsets, and these T cells also help to increase the effectiveness of these antibodies and work, as I mentioned, as a cascade type of effect earlier. So basically the antigen is presented to the cell, then the T helper cells come in and help to form antibodies, and then there's an activation of the B cell, which leads to activation of the macrophages and phagocytosis, and then there's antibody production from the B cell. So activation of cytotoxic cells, their job is to really kill all of these bacterial cells and bring death to the actual infection. I hope this makes sense. There was a lot of information, and I hope I was able to put it together as well as I could. Thank you.